Welcome to the Grow Senior Care Podcast. Forget about being average. We're here to redefine what's possible in both your business and your life. Get fired up because we're here to help you simplify your life, grow your business with less hassle, and love what you do. Now, here's your host, Jeremy Fuller from Grow Senior Care Marketing.
Well, hello, everybody listening and tuning into the Grow Senior Care Podcast. It's my pleasure today to welcome Regina onto our podcast. We're so excited today to share some insights about hiring team members, getting them into the right seat in your company, creating measurable impact. That way you're not wondering, what's going on in my company? Is the things that should be happening, or is things just falling apart and I don't even know about it? You know, so sometimes being a business owner, it's a little hard to scale, especially when you don't know what you don't know, right? Trying to create those SOPs, trying to create that team and scale a team, you know, it's very difficult. It's not the easiest thing in the world, especially if that's not your background, if that's not your skill set. So today we're going to go over that with Regina. Regina, would you just please share a little bit about yourself and your company?
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Jeremy, for letting me be on your podcast. I'm super honored to be here. My name's Regina. I am the CEO and founder of Ascension Business Solutions. We are a virtual assistant firm that specifically provides VAs to home care agencies. So I started my healthcare background back in 2008, actually. So I have about 17 years of experience of starting companies, growing companies, and being able to sell those companies. So my company is actually an accumulation of that 17 years and me passing down that knowledge to my virtual assistants to better serve our clients.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I know that we were talking a little bit before, starting today. And one of the things that we were, just discussing was a lot of the problems that you see with home care agency owners. So, some of those things was that we were going over is, you're talking to these home care agency owners, right? They're sharing their weak points in their company. And one of those things was not having the right people doing the right thing. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So a lot of times even the owners themselves, they feel stuck in the weeds. They feel like they can't get away from daily operations. They feel like they're working around the clock and there never seems to be enough time to focus on like these higher level initiatives that owners should be doing and focusing on. And why is that? It comes down to you don't have the right people doing the right thing, like you said, Jeremy.
So is it that maybe they've hired some people and so they continually have to be there to help, or, if they a lot of these companies, home care agency owners, right? They're hiring in staff inside their office. So what's going on there? If it's not the right people doing the right thing or the right person in the right seat, what's going on? What's the solution there?
So the problem is that a lot of times you hire the wrong person, or they weren't trained to do what you expect them to do. There aren't any standard operating procedures for them to follow. And so they end up failing, and no one really wants to fail consistently. Yeah. Sometimes you might promote a caregiver and take them out of the field thinking, oh, they know the business, but they actually don't know the business side of home care, and they end up failing as well. And now you lost a really good caregiver on top of that.
Yeah. It's sad because not everybody that gets into becoming a caregiver. A great example is my wife. She loves working with seniors. She loves being around them. It brightens her day to help somebody else, right? And so there's caregivers that are getting into, home care, companion care, and they're not necessarily skilled at spreadsheets, so to speak, right? So you take somebody who's likes human interaction, and you're like, well, you're really good at providing care, right? And I think you would excel over here. That doesn't always compute. Sometimes it does, I would say it's not a lot, because I've also heard that issue with a lot of home care agency owners. So if it's not always the right person in the right seat, what's the answer to that solution? How do you guys, you guys are a staffing company for home care agencies. So how are you guys finding the right people for the right seat?
I think it comes down to finding the right person. Like, what are our screening qualifications? Like for us, they have to have a bachelor's degree, right? But also, do they have this mindset of everything is figure outable? They need to
I
be
like that
able,
word.
yeah,
Everything is figure outable. I've never heard that before. That's awesome.
it's actually a book that changed the way I looked at life and at business. Jeremy, you've been in business for a long time too. How did we get to this point? How did we get here? We figured it out, right?
Yeah.
And not a lot of times people don't have that mentality. They want to be handheld to get to the top, but that's not what happens in life. And so I'm looking for those individuals that are, one, they are, they have their bachelor's degree, but also they want to learn. They're hungry. They're naturally curious, and they want to make an impact.
That's awesome. Yeah, I just speaking on that note, problem solvers, it sounds like,
Exactly.
right? I remember when I was younger, I started making websites when I was about 16. I got a client when I was about 18 on this particular project, and they wanted to have an interactive map, right? Where you could click on the website and go in on different things. I had no idea how to make it. Traditionally, you would have to use something by Adobe called Flash. Doesn't exist anymore. And I didn't know how to use Flash, but the client had this deadline. I really wanted to help the client out, so I told him, I said, "Look, I got you covered. I can do this." I had no idea how to do it, but I was a problem solver. So I stayed up all night for like the next 3 nights figuring out how to do this. And I landed on, I hate Flash. I'm not going to do this in Flash. And then there was some new technology that came out, and I was one of the forefront of using this technology for web, and it was called SVG, scalable vector projects, or images, or some objects. Scalable vector graphics. And I don't even do this anymore, but I created this whole thing, and I figured out how to do it. And I didn't know how to do it before. It wasn't like my thing that I did, but I was a problem solver, right? So I think that's key is, when you have team members in your office that aren't solving problems, well, then, yeah, you as the owner, you do have to come in and solve that problem. So I think that's a key trait with team members. And thankfully here at Grow Senior Care Marketing, our team members here, we are problem solvers. We're always looking for ways to become better and do things on the cutting edge. And in the world of SEO and digital marketing, you better be a problem solver, because that changes so fast, right? Okay, so let's talk about training. So how do you go about training these team members? Because, we're talking about, one of the big problems is the owners stuck in the business, stuck working in the business and not on the business. So how do we get them out? Another one of those things is lack of training, I feel like. What are your thoughts?
So definitely, when I find these professionals, I find the best of the best, and then how do I make them better? We put them through a very vigorous 80-hour training per role. So whether that's recruiting, scheduling, or on call, it's very comprehensive. It even goes into, what is home care? Why is that different than home health and hospice? What are caregivers, and what are they expected to do inside the homes? Even your clients. What is Alzheimer's? What is dementia? How do you transfer a patient? We want to give them this super solid foundation of understanding, but also they work with senior recruiters, senior schedulers, senior on-call professionals within my team, so that way before they get to the client, they understand what the position looks like and how
Right.
other people have been solving that. But going back to, like, just everything is figure outable, I teach them this 1-3-1 method, where, one, you have to identify what the real problem is, right? And then what are your 3 viable solutions? And then what is your number 1 recommendation that you would bring to your clients. So for example, you don't want to say, hey, Jeremy, we're not getting any applicants, right? That might not even be the problem. The problem might be it's because your application is 37 pages long and nobody wants to fill out a 37 page long,
Right.
And so
Right.
what we do, figure out these different ways to shorten it, and maybe you need to break it up into different bite-sized portions, and then tell Jeremy, I've identified a bottleneck, and I think if we do this, it's going to help solve that problem.
That's good. I like that. And just thinking about the home care agency owners that might be bringing in team members that are caregivers, bringing them into the office, setting and trying to get them plugged into the business. I don't think that they're putting in 80 hours of training. I don't think that they're even maybe going into the differences of home care and hospice and all those things, right? And home health care. I don't think they're necessarily, I think they're training them on the software, right? I think they're sitting them down, showing them the software. And then those things come up like you talked about, and the person doesn't know how to handle it, or it puts a like a wrench in their brain going. It's like, oh, stop. Now what do I do? They don't know, right? And so that's really good if you're listening. What rule is that? It's a
131.
131. Is that also a book or training that you got that from, that somebody can go learn more about that?
I picked it up somewhere. I don't remember where, but even with my own team, sometimes they'll come up to me and they'll tell me what their problem is, and I said, hey, go back to your desk and do the 131, because really I hired you
Right.
to figure this out, and if I have to do it myself, then what's the point of you being here?
I'm in the business now, not working on the business. Yeah, got it. That's awesome. All right. So, another thing that I really feel like I hear a lot of is, if it's the wrong person in the right seat, maybe, or the right seat for the wrong person, right? And there's lack of training. Well, if there's no training, there's probably not an SOP, right? There's probably not a standard operating procedure that they're going to be trained on, because lack of training, so to speak. So if there's no SOP, then how do they measure, right? I think that's another, thing that I sense. And I've been in, I speak at home care conferences, and I've even been in cars with groups of home care agency owners that are complaining about their staff. They're complaining that their schedulers are, calling out, and then now they've got to do scheduling on the weekend, just different things. And I'm sitting in the car and I'm just wondering, well, that's probably solvable by this or that. And I'm just thinking, I don't want to like put them on the spot. And I'm just like, what kind of training did you do? What kind of system or process did you put in place? And so let's talk about measuring, because I feel like if there is no SOP, you can't actually have realistic expectations either. So no measurement that would be there, and then no expectations on if the team member's doing what they should or shouldn't be doing.
Exactly. And I love that, like I go to a lot of these conferences too, and speakers like you and Steve Weiss and all these industry giants, they always talk about SOPs, standard operating procedures, how to streamline your agency, your operations. But a lot of times people don't know how to do that. They don't have the time to do that, or they don't want to do that. And they end up recreating the wheel over and over and over. They're working from memory, which is very dangerous,
Yeah.
But with using virtual assistants, for example, that's what they do starting day one. And so when, for example, if you, Jeremy, were to teach your virtual assistant how to screen a resume or how to conduct an interview, what we would do is record that. And we would use that recording to then analyze the workflow and build SOPs around it, use that recording and even hyperlink it into the SOP that we've created, and then archive all of these SOPs into one company manual. And that company manual then serves as your playbook for success. So again, as you scale, as you grow, so does your administrative burden.
Mm-hmm.
And so hiring more team members, now you have a training program. Now you have SOPs that are easy to follow. Like we always say, simplicity scales, complexity fails.
That's
So
really
how,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. Not to cut you off, but that I was just like, yeah, that's really good.
No, and it's, and this also solves another problem that a lot of owners are seeing. What happens when your key player leaves, right? Sometimes people are operating super lean and they only have one operations manager that's doing everything, and she gets burnt out and she
Yeah.
leaves. I think it's super important to transfer that knowledge from her head onto paper. And so that way even if key personnel leave, your company doesn't go into a free fall of productivity, that all that work doesn't go onto the owner's plate because no one else knows how to do it.
Right. Yeah, that's good. So, I think that that's part of the problem is that one of the biggest problems is that there's not an SOP to train. So then you can't train them. So then there's lack of training. And what we talked about also was, you can't really SOP what you don't know. And I think that's probably where it starts, right? So let's say, for example, there's a lot of the home care agency owners that I've met have started their company not because they're executives or have owned companies for years and now this is just another company that they have. A lot of them are nurses. A lot of them started this business because they had a loved one that they were caring for. And that doesn't always correlate to, oh yeah, I know how to create systems, I know how to create payroll, I know how to do HR, I know how to do all this stuff. Maybe they're a great nurse, right? But they're not great at, logging into social media and scheduling posts, going to their scheduler system or whatever that software is or technology, right? And so they don't know how to do it themselves. So they could never record a video or create an SOP. So I think it's super beneficial to have people that you can rely on, like you, where you can bring on a company that knows the standard operating procedure that should be in place, can train the team member, and then they can hand off to you, the owner, hey, this is what you should expect, right? And if that's not happening, then here's what you do next, right? And so can you talk a little bit about that? How you guys create SOPs? Like you talked about the video, and if that's it, great. I mean, that's the system there. The team member comes on, you make a video, you SOP it out. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So it's kind of funny. Like, have you ever had a dog before?
Yes, they've all they're all passed away. I had them when I was kids. I don't have any pets anymore. Well, I've got cats now. Cats are way easier to manage than dogs.
So when I got my dogs recently, I got them, no, not recently, like a few years ago, and I took them to a trainer. The trainer didn't actually train my dog. The trainer trains you as a person, as the owner. And so a lot of times when building SOPs, we have to train the clients or their operations manager on a few things because, like, for example, delegating is not necessarily an intrinsic skill that everyone has. So we have to teach them how to delegate. What do you not like doing? What do you hate doing? What is the most important thing that needs to be done that's not getting done? Right. And then we teach them how to give feedback. We teach them how to use this tight feedback loop where if you see something that's wrong, you notify us right away and we fix it from a process level. And then we send it back to you and we go, hey, does this look good now? Right. So
Right.
for example, giving that feedback, and I teach my VAs, don't take it personally.
Yeah.
I think that's a skill that a lot of people forget. Sometimes you give them feedback and they get really hurt, but that's not the purpose. It's not a personal attack. And then finally, we teach them also how to let go. We Sometimes the owner's been doing recruiting herself for the past 2 years, and so she doesn't want to let this go, right? But then you wonder why your business isn't growing. It's because you're not focusing on the higher level issues or the higher level initiatives that you should be doing. And so all of this, we teach them through our onboarding process, which takes about 2 to 3 weeks. And it's actually facilitated by a success manager. They're holding your VA accountable by building these SOPs, and we're also holding the clients accountable. And yeah, it pretty much solves that problem.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, just from personal, experience, I am not the best at creating SOPs myself. And so one thing that I did is I started working with my team and I created an SOP on how to create SOPs. And so basically what we do is very similar to you. We have Loom. We start recording the task and whatever it is, and we notate verbally what we're clicking on. So for example, let's say we're screen recording. If our mouse is going up to a button that says start, or let's say it's a button that says close or whatever, we're not going to say go over here and click this, because this is very broad. We'll say move your mouse to the top left corner and click close. Very specific, because what Loom does is it transcribes the audio as well. And then we have a chat GPT prompt. So we'll have a video. So our team member can always watch the video of that SOP. And then we actually have a chat GPT prompt that takes the transcript of the Loom video, breaks it down into sections and bullet points. So if a person wants to read as well, they can do that. That's kind of how we do that. And then what we do is we break everything down into categories. So like an example would be, SEO. Another example might be web design. Well, underneath web design, there's a few subcategories. And then in those categories, we have all of the SOPs for those categories. So that's kind of how we do it. You should call it manual. We call it a knowledge base, where all of the knowledge exists for that category. And then they can just go there, find it, and they've got it. And then we have a whole another process on how we update our SOPs. So I think that's super important. You had mentioned a little bit ago about the SOPs, but how do you solve some of these other problems? We haven't really talked about some of the big problems that you guys solve as with your company. One of those things I know is recruiting. You mentioned a stat while we were talking. Can you just talk a little bit about how you solve their recruiting problem and some of those stats that exist?
Yeah, so we found that 77% of caregivers are going to leave within the next 6 months. Why do they leave? There's a few different reasons there, but as an owner, what is your strategy to replenish your pipeline of caregivers you always want to kind of like a stockpile of caregivers that are ready to go. They've been vetted, you have their background checks, all of that ready to go. So that way you can always accept clients as you need to. So recruiting is definitely one of the ways that our virtual assistants help owners get the support that they need, but it's at a fraction of a cost. So it's keeping their overhead super low as well. But my dad was in the military. He says, if you chase two rabbits, you won't catch either one of them. And so it's nice to delegate something as important like recruiting to one specific person. Sometimes these owners, you ask them and they're like, well, who's doing recruiting now? And they're like, well, we all kind of pitch in where we can, right? And that's why we might not be seeing the best outcomes, because you don't know where one person stops and another person begins. We always say you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. So really delegating something like virtual recruiting to us is super impactful on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. And then just something that came to mind that I wanted to talk to you about, and that was, building out structure, building out SOPs. If they're stuck in the business right now, okay, so you guys are solving a lot of these problems, but if there's a home care agency owner, let's say he has the capacity financially to hire people, but he's been holding off because he doesn't know how to show them, or he's afraid of letting go that task, or of whatever it is he's doing. So maybe he's trying to bring in his wife or friends or family, and it's just not working out, right? He's still stuck, or he, she, whatever, they are, stuck in the business. What's some of the ways that they should start finding those things to offload? I think earlier I shared with you how I have done that. Do you want to talk about the process that you guys recommend?
Typically, owners come to us already having an idea of what they need, and it's usually one of three or four things: recruiting, scheduling, because scheduling is super hard. It's like constantly playing a game of Tetris. There's things falling down. You got to move things around to make them fit, and it could all blow up. On call is definitely an emerging trend, because if you think about it, who's on call? It's typically the owner and their team. But guess what? We just worked an entire 40 hours of grueling work. Now we got to be on call for the weekend too, So
Yeah.
on call is definitely a great way to give your team that support that they need, give them a chance to relax and be with their families. But also from a business standpoint, it's like, why do people quit? Is because they get burnt out, because they never get time to rest.
Yeah.
And so if you can say to, when you're hiring people, guess what? You don't ever have to work on call ever again, compared to where you came from. So come on over to us.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really good. Well, so I want to get to, there's more that we could talk about. I have a bunch of ideas rolling around in my head, but let's just talk about your company for a moment. How do you guys usually start these conversations with home care agency owners? How would they reach out to you if they wanted to start that conversation?
Definitely. If you guys called or emailed me, but we also have our website. And if you go onto our website, all of that contact information is there as well. And what we'll do is I'll present to you guys a demo, literally showing you guys how we recruit, how we train, how we create SOPs in the onboarding process, and our follow-up throughout the year to ensure that your VA is still effective no matter what. I love that demo because it's so informational. I feel like sometimes people are very hesitant to hire virtual assistants because it's based out of fear of the unknown. And so just doing that demo could answer a lot of those questions.
That's awesome. Okay. Now, what's the website that they go to? Phil, can you just say it real quickly so people listening?
Yeah, it's www dot, no, sorry. It's www.ab-solutions.org.
Got it. Okay. And then we'll make sure to put that in the description, and you can click on that in the description of this video. What's another way somebody can reach out to you? Do you have a phone number, an email that you want to share for our audience?
Yeah, if you call me at 720-651-0841 or email me at admin@abs-co.org. And I did want to mention, Jeremy, that we can typically place new clients with their next Rockstar virtual assistant within 1 to 2 weeks' time.
That's awesome. So you have them ready to go. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on our podcast today. If you're one of those home care agency owners and you're thinking, man, I have all these things that I need to take care of, but how do I prioritize what's the most important thing that I need to tackle today? If you're like me, you have that list, right? I need to do this, I need to do that. And you might even be doing some of those in office tasks, working in your business instead of on it. And you're trying to figure that out. Well, one of those things that we highly recommend that you outsource, so to speak, is your digital marketing, your SEO, your website, all of your basically your digital lead generation. and we see caregivers coming in, we see clients coming in. So that's what we do here at Grow Senior Care Marketing. Check us out on our website, growseniorcaremarketing.com. Again, my name's Jeremy, and you're awesome. Have a blessed day.